What's going on, everybody? And welcome into the 127th episode of the CRZY podcast. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Gates, and this is the show where we talk about creativity, leadership, design, and a whole lot of other stuff that helps to empower creative people. Now, remember, you can listen to the show, get all the show notes, and a whole lot more. You can always just head over to thecrazy1.com. That's the words the crazy and the number 1.com. Also, remember, whenever on your favorite podcast platform, hit the subscribe button so you get the latest episodes whenever those come out. And while you're there, do me a favor, leave a quick review. Could be a couple stars, couple words, whatever you think about the show. Lets me know people are listening, helps more people find the show and the content, and damn it, I just appreciate it. And also remember that the Crazy One is now on YouTube, so you can find videos that I've done on career coaching, tutorials, masterclasses, old keynotes, new keynotes, a whole bunch of stuff. That's an easy one to find too. Just head over to thecrazy1.com/YouTube and you can subscribe to that content too. Now, it seems like we might have stirred things up just a touch with the last episode. And so, in case you didn't listen to it, so in episode 126, I wanted to talk about sort of what's the state of the job market right now, what's going on, what's my experience been, a whole bunch of stuff like that. And one of the things that we talked about in there was this concept of defensive employment. This was a concept that came from talking to a friend of mine, Mike Tinglin, and Mike had sort of summed up where I think we're at right now perfectly whenever he said that we are in the era of defensive employment. And I think that got a big reaction. I've got a lot of emails. I've been getting a lot of notes. I've been getting a lot of DMs, a bunch of stuff like that, really with a lot of questions about what's it going to mean for everybody? Like how do you need to think about your career? How do you need to start to sort of move through the world and through the industry? And these are all really good questions. And I think on the one hand, look, I think this is a developing trend. I think it's still a little bit early. But I think in this episode, what I wanted to do was to we'll do a quick loop back to just, again, sort of define what does defensive employment mean? But I think more importantly, just start to really look at what is this going to mean for you? What does it mean for your leadership if you're a leader? Just what's it going to be in this new reality, which again, I think a lot of us are going through, a lot of us are experiencing it. I think you probably even feel it instinctually, but how are we a little bit more thoughtful around it? How are we a little bit more deliberate around it? And think about, again, how do we survive, thrive, sort of wherever it is we're at, right? How do we get through this sort of new era and new way of having a career? And that's what I said. I think the headline is things have changed. And that really, I think defensive employment, the state that so many of us find ourselves in, came out of a lot of things that have happened, I don't know, what would we say, over the last 2 years? Maybe there are things that have recurred over the last 2 years. And then the bottom line when we talk about defensive employment is that, look, at the end of the day, we all know and we all continue to see on a constant basis that companies will basically do whatever they need to do to protect their bottom line, whether they need to do layoffs, cut budgets, whether they need to cut products, whether they need to, whatever it is that they need to do, right? They're going to do whatever it is to protect their bottom line. Well, I really think that what's going on is just the era of defensive employment is that people are now starting to do the same thing of how do we protect what matters to us. That could be where we want to live, the lifestyle. It could be a work-life balance. It could be where we want to go in our career. It could be a lot of these other things, right? But like whatever our bottom lines are, how do we start to protect those? Because I think especially over the last couple of years, really, especially maybe in the last 6 months, we've seen these things that remind us of this stuff a little bit too much. We've seen layoffs. Again, if you're listening to the show live, so we're in early November of 2022, just this week, we've seen layoffs from Twitter, from Lyft, from Stripe, again, I know there's more that escape me, but we're seeing these layoffs all the time where every time there's an economic downturn, basically you get punished for the company's mismanagement of their finances or the fact that they were betting on growth that wasn't really there, so they'd overextended, right? Like there's a lot of these sort of things that are happening, and so, again, people suddenly become very disposable. I think you also see the other result of that. You see a lot of reorgs. I think I've talked to people, again, just this week, who within the last 12 calendar months have been through 6 or 8 reorgs just in that past 12 months, which is, I don't understand. How do you do 8 reorgs in 12 months, right? Like, that's just, you just say, look, we're going to take a year where we're going to get nothing done. But that's the thing. This constant shuffle, bring in new leadership, do different things, like throw everything up in the air, start over. I think we're starting to see that intersection between company bottom lines and personal bottom lines. A lot of that comes through this remote work versus hybrid work versus in person. And again, we're seeing like up to 70% of people said they take a pay cut to get the work-life balance that they want, to live where they want, to be able to have that sort of flexibility, where I think employers are starting to prey a little bit on sort of where the market is at and start to put downward pressure on salaries, downward pressure on positions, downward pressure on coming back into the offices because they've spent huge amounts of money on these buildings, on these pieces of real estate. I think we're also seeing sort of a double contraction of design. One, like, there's always a contraction of design every time there's an economic downturn or the threat of one. You would think we've all seen this movie enough times that, the first thing they do is they cut design, they cut marketing, and then 6 months later they realize that that means that we don't have the product we need, we don't have the demand we need, we don't have the top of the funnel, lead gen that we need, so go hire all those people back. But I think that is then coupled with, there's been a long investment in design for a while now into expensive positions and expensive heads of design, and I don't know that a lot of businesses feel like they've seen the return on that investment. So they're starting to look at putting those dollars other places, and that pendulum, I think, is starting to swing a little bit away from being so design heavy. And I think also on both sides, there is just rampant, and I mean rampant, bad hiring practices and bad etiquette. I think, I think I've talked in this show before, about once a month, I have sort of my support group, my brain trust, my personal board of directors, whatever it is, this group that we all get together. It's all design leaders who've been through similar things. I've run that for years. I've never had a moment where every single person on that call is experiencing getting ghosted, jobs that just simply suddenly go away, of, again, these comically low salaries, of applying for jobs that you never hear back from, of, again, CEOs reach out and it doesn't go anywhere. Like, that used to be 1 or 2 people out of maybe the 20 to 30 people that are on that call. Now it's every single one. And I hear from people either through my mentoring or through people who reach out every single day about just how demoralizing, dehumanizing this process is at every level of the industry. And I think companies don't realize how they are damaging and trashing their brands. I think they don't understand the talent that doesn't want to go work for them because they've heard these horror stories. I don't think they don't realize they're not getting the talent they need to fix whatever problems they have, because these processes are so bad. I don't know why. They're like, I'd love to interview a recruiter. I'd love to talk to somebody who can explain to me, like, what is going on where you just decide that, like, ghosting somebody after they've talked to your CEO is a good idea. But so much, like, this is just all built up and layered on layered. And this is why we're in the area of defensive employment, because, like, the gig economy used to be that there's this group of people that would just go from sort of job to job, working whenever they wanted to, doing what they wanted to, because they basically just sort of recognized that was a better existence for them. It was more of the lifestyle they wanted. That has now, I think, genuinely transcended to everyone is basically in the gig economy. That people know they're free agents. That, for almost all of us, I think we all inherently know that era of thinking you're going to go someplace for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, it doesn't happen, right? Like, even if you find somebody that's been someplace 5, 7, 9 years, it's like they did a magic trick or something. You're like, can you tell me how you did this? Because I need to understand. How could you stay there for that long? And it's just, it's this recognition that, look, companies at the end of the day are going to take care of their bottom line. So I need to take care of my bottom line. I need to look out for myself. I need to, if a better job comes along, a better pay comes along, a better opportunity comes along, I'm gone, right? I'm going to go take advantage of that. And this 100% costs companies, that turnover, that attrition, that retraining, that knowledge loss. These are huge, huge drains on teams. But again, there doesn't seem to be the recognition of what that loss is. And so I think, like, these are the things that are making up why I think we are in this era of defensive employment. Now, let's take a detour here for one quick second, right? Because I've seen a couple posts since I put out the last episode, and I put out what was a joke, what was obviously a joke. If you look at the Photoshop, clearly it was a joke, of a Halloween costume, and it said, the costume was what I think it was the freelance recruiter who ghosted me. I thought it was funny. I thought it was something to the point where this has become so dominant that, again, somebody mocked this up and sort of made fun of it. Now, it was interesting because I think, some people chose to take that post. Of course, none of these people ever address you directly. None of them ever, right? Like, it's so clear that, they just want to have the internet fight, not an actual discussion. But, there were comments around, like, if you post this, you don't deserve recruiters' time. You don't deserve their respect. You don't, these sort of things, right? And so, like, let's talk about that for a second, right? Because, look, I don't know when this happened, but I think, we have to acknowledge, for whatever reason, that as an industry, we've lost a good chunk of our professionalism, our respect, our humanity at a scale that I haven't ever seen before. Now, let me be clear, right? Because again, it's always fun when other people try to spin your message. This is not, I don't hate recruiters. I don't hate HR teams, right? This doesn't apply to everyone. I know some spectacular, right? Like, talk to on a regular basis. Like, I've written recommendations for recruiters that I didn't even get hired from because I just thought they were so great and they genuinely cared about me. They cared about my career. They took the time to think about that. These are truly exceptional people, right? But I think if you have been engaged in this space at all, and I also find it funny that the people who largely did those posts have not been engaged in this market for a very long time, that, look, I think that is so the exception and not the rule. Again, whenever you look at, applying for a job works 2 to 4% of the time. Most of the time you hear nothing. Again, the number of people, almost everybody I know who's been engaged in a process and gotten ghosted, right? Like, this is not an insignificant problem. This is not something where, again, if you put that behavior into probably any other part of your life, where if you hired somebody to do something, you're having a conversation and they just, suddenly just ghosted you, you aren't going to be like, it's not a big deal. That's fine. Outside of like the weatherman who's allowed to be wrong that often, I struggle to find people that act that way. But that's the thing, right? Is this behavior, these problems, where we find ourselves is because way too many people who run hiring processes, and I hear the same story over and over again, go through this. And this is causing real mental health damage. And that is done by whenever we treat people like a thing and not like a person. And look, I have been self-reflective, and I need to own my role in that. There have been people who've reached out to be a part of my teams that I did not treat them well. I did not get back to them. I had other things that I thought were more important, or just sort of let it ride and inflicted that damage myself. So I'm not immune from what's going on to this. I've been a part of the problem. But here's the bottom line, right? Is at the end of the day, I am never going to apologize. I'm never going to back off from the opinion that I do not think it is too much to ask that when a company has shown interest in me, whenever they have reached out to me, whenever I have taken the time to fill out their extensive job application, whenever they've asked for hours of my time to interview me, they've asked for my time to put together case studies, basically any engagement in this process where I feel like I've gotten my hopes up, I've emotionally invested in this. And again, I think that even, when you think about this stuff, right? To even the fact that it seems to be too much, or the fact that if I feel like I deserve what I think is even basic humanity, respect, professionalism, empathy, any of these sort of things, right? Like, look, at the end of the day, if I apply for the job, like, just send me a form letter, that's fine. But a lot of this is, and again, let's specifically talk about the ones who ghost you. You have asked for my time, for my investment. You are putting me in a place where it is almost impossible to get excited about anything. You put me in a place where it's almost impossible to trust people because, oh yeah, I'm going to get right back to you, and you don't hear. And the thing is that, again, this doesn't happen once. You take that experience, you take that feeling, and you multiply it over days, over weeks, over months of the same bullshit, time after time after time, until you doubt your skills, you doubt every career decision, you doubt if you should keep going in this industry, That is the result of this, right? This isn't some, ego participation medal sort of a thing. I don't think that it is asking for too much, that they actually show me that level of respect, right? I'm not disrespecting them, but what I think I'm doing instead is I'm asking them to respect us, because the reality is, they're just trying to fill a job. We're trying to keep our families afloat. We're trying to keep our mortgage paid. We're trying to make sure this is the right livelihood. We're trying to figure out what our future is. These are not small decisions. These are not small mental health journeys that we are on here. So I will not, apologize for thinking that treating people with that level of humanity and decency is something that I should expect. And I also don't think it is too much to say that I will not work for companies that act that way. And look, I also recognize that I'm in a privileged spot to be able to say some of those things. Some people have to go work for shitty companies because you got to keep the lights on. You got to pay the mortgage. But that's the thing. I'm not going to apologize for asking to be treated like a person. And I think anybody who is so privileged or biased or blind to think that somehow that is an unfair thing to do, let me know. I'm happy to let's do an episode of us debating that, because I would love to talk that out. But all of this has, right? Like this, all of that frustration, all of this has created this new reality, this new era of defensive employment, where again, people are so aware of what their bottom lines are because of the pandemic, but so aware of what a company will do what it needs to do because of its bottom lines. So it begs a simple question, right? What does this mean for you? What are the things that you need to start doing differently? If you haven't already started to do them, what are the things that you need to do to be successful? And I think there's a couple. I think the first one is you really need to focus on how you join a team, and join a team differently. Because I think in a lot of cases, if you're going to be defensive, if you're going to show up as an equal in that process, and you need to show up as an equal in that process, it means you need to start doing some things that I'm guessing a lot of people probably haven't. It means you need to really look at and negotiate your salary. Never take the first offer. Again, there's a whole episode of the show. If you have not listened to it, track back through the episodes, and there's a whole episode just about how do you negotiate your salary. In there as well is also you need to look at what are the actual terms of your employment. What is the company legally stepping up to do? Because we'll talk about this in a minute. Most companies in the United States are not legally bound to pay you any severance. They are not bound to pay you any bonuses. They tend to sell you on the hopefully one day this is what this equity will mean, a lot of that stuff. But look at your contract for what are they legally bound to do. Because it's all great in the beginning and it's all happy and possibilities, but with that moment when the things go bad and they decide they're going to start laying people off, it's a real different tone. So look at what are those terms of your employment. Understand what are the terms of your severance. Are there even any? Right? Ask these questions and say, what is it that how much severance will you pay? Is it in writing? Is it a part of my contract? Is it a part of my sign-on? Right? You need to be able to understand what these things are, as opposed to waiting till it's too late and they already laid you off and you're like, oh, well, damn it, I really wish I would have known they're not paying me anything. I think you also need to start doing real research. And that means this is beyond Glassdoor, right? I mean, go in, and again, all of this is going to, you have to take all of it with a grain of salt. But again, go into apps like Blind, go into other apps like that to see what are the real reviews, what are people really saying, do real references, reach out to people at the company. I've even gone so far as sometimes as to reaching out to the person who had the job I'm interviewing for last. Ask your employer, will they be okay if you talk to them? It's this level of due diligence. It's this level of really protecting yourself, protecting your bottom line that you've got to start to do. And I think whenever you get that job, you have got to be aware of what is going on around you. And I think so many creatives I see do not do this sort of stuff. You got to read the signals that are around you. Looking at what is your company performance doing? What is the economy doing? Take the time, listen to the quarterly earnings calls that your company has if it is publicly traded. The worst it's going to do is to give you a much better understanding of what your priorities are. Again, are you trending up, trending down? What is the forecast looking like? Because again, whenever you understand if they're adjusting up or down what their projections are, that gives you a good sense of where it is you're going with those sort of things. But pay attention to those sort of things. Look at leadership turnover, right? Look at understand how long has somebody been in that tenure? How are they doing? How do you feel like they're performing? Be able to look at those sort of things, because these are the tea leaves that are going to help you understand when should you get ready to jump, when are you okay and you should be fine. But to understand, because look, at the end of the day, that dollar, that economy is going to rule and be a huge, huge factor in what is going on. I will constantly remind people until the day I stop doing this, right? Look, I got laid off with my work running globally in an Apple commercial because a bunch of people on the board decided that they wanted to sell the company. It didn't save me, right? I just generated, I don't know how many millions of dollars from Apple keynotes and press and TV commercials. And again, like this amazing work. It could not save me from getting laid off. So you have to, there is not a time where you're going to be bulletproof enough to not worry about this stuff. But I think also while you're there, this is the time where we also have to start making sure that our bottom lines while we're in these jobs are getting taken care of. And making sure that you have two-way goals so that you know your career is going somewhere, that you know that you are getting out of this time that you're with this company something that is worth it, right? Now, the first part of that is that you need to be clear around what it is you want. You need to be clear around what are the things that you want to get out of this job. Where do you want to go? Too many people, again, they accept what the industry gives them. They don't go out and take what they want. It is a small but extremely profound difference around what those things are. But you need to know where it is that you want to go, and then make sure that you are talking to your boss or your company so that you are getting those opportunities, so your goals are aligned against that. And to do this for two really simple but really important reasons. One is because I want to continue to advance in my career, and I want to make sure that whenever I know exactly what do I need to do to get to that next level. And so that whenever that happens, I can hold them accountable to make sure they are delivering on what it is that they've said. And also because whenever I'm putting those goals out there and they are measurable goals, then I want to make sure that I can take credit for that whenever I exceed them. Because if goals are not measurable, and again, if it's just like, oh, make things better, those are bullshit goals, right? Because they are not going to get you to that next level. They are not going to get you the bonus you want. They're not going to be able to get you to that next place because you can't say, oh, I exceeded it by X amount. So make sure that, again, you are signing up for what those goals are, for making sure that they are measurable so you know what this stuff is. But I think probably one of the biggest changes is going to be, and I think, the more senior you are, the more senior you are in the work that you've done, the more this next one is going to come into play, is that you absolutely have to really start looking at having a more activated personal brand and a more activated network. Now, this concept came out of a conversation I had last week with Dan Mall. If you don't know Dan, go follow him. He's the founder of Super Friendly, an agency that focuses on design systems, but just one of the smartest guys I know. And I think, Dan and I were sort of talking about our individual journeys as now sort of both being sort of like solo studio owners, and what does that mean, and what's that journey look like, and where do we see things going? And Dan had said, look, that was really his perspective, was that he felt like the people with activated networks, with activated personal brands, meaning the ones who were genuinely engaged with people, the ones who had real connections with people, not the ones that were going and collecting like hollow LinkedIn connections or follows or those sort of things, right? Because I've always said those are functionally meaningless. But people who have real connections, people who really have something to say, people who understand who they are, these are the people that are not only going to be successful, but these are the people that are going to dominate in this space, because the jobs that you want are probably going to be more word of mouth. And we'll get into that in a second in leadership, but you're going to find more of those opportunities. You're going to be able to engage more. You're going to be able to, again, that doesn't mean you're an extrovert. It doesn't mean you go create a bunch of BS content, but it does mean that you genuinely value and invest in real relationships. And again, I think that is something a lot of us don't do enough. But again, we know applying for jobs doesn't work. But what we do know works is reaching out to your network. We know that, again, trying to do it yourself doesn't work, but having a mentor does, right? Like there's so many of these things where, again, it is reminding ourselves and owning that what makes us unique has value. Our brand has value. We have value. And finding other people who want to do that. Because that, again, whenever people ask me why did I start my own studio, it sort of comes down to like, look, I just want to do cool shit with cool people, right? Like that's really all that I want. And so do I have the network? Do I have those people that I can work with and work for to be able to do that? And I think that's the sort of thing that you need to think about is how do you have the ability, an activated network, an activated brand to find those sort of things? Because if not, then what you're going to be done is you're going to be left with everybody else where the average job is getting 250 to 400 applications with a 2 to 4% success rate. And it's just, you're not going to find the success that you want there. And again, I think there's a lot of ways to start to do that, but it's about genuinely reaching out to people. But I think the other part of this also is that recognizing part of defensive employment is that you need to build some level of defenses. Because again, look, this week we've seen Twitter, Stripe, Lyft, and so many others where you see things can change so quickly. And, I think for so many of us, that means we need to start to think about always keeping some sort of safety net on hand. Because the reality is that most of the time, the people who get punished in these situations aren't the people who should. Because you get laid off, I get laid off, right? But the people, most of the time who created that situation, the executives, most of the time they stay employed or they have these big golden parachutes that are there to be able to protect them. And they're going to land on their feet or they're going to go work on a board or do whatever it is. And here again, I think it is incredibly important for you to be aware of this. That in the United States, your employer does not have to give you severance, right? You should be sure that you know the laws of your country and or your state for what do they have to do, whether it's full-time, whether it's freelance. You need to understand this because most people seem to be under the mistaken impression that, if anything happens, my company will take care of me, they're going to pay me severance. In the vast majority of the United States and the vast majority of states, for full-time employers, they are not under a legal obligation, unless it was in your contract or something else, to have to pay you severance. That is something they do to be nice. Again, not all companies are nice. So this means you need to look at keeping a bit of a safety net. How do you, whenever you see those tea leaves, whenever you're looking at the financial performance isn't going well, those quarterly earnings calls, they keep revising those numbers down. That's whenever it's like, look, start to think about what is that nest egg? Start to think about how do you keep your credit card bills down? I know responsibility is not fun, but keeping the lights on is, keeping a place to stay is, getting through the next couple of months until you can get a job is a lot more fun than what those alternatives are. So again, I think that whenever you're seeing those arrows trending in the wrong direction, to think about that. But I think we also can't talk about this era of defensive employment without, I think, also talking about mental health. Because that is what I think, as you are going through the application process, trying to find a job in this environment and believing in yourself almost becomes an act of will. Because it is just almost a fire hose of rejection, right? It is a fire hose of bad news, or I don't like the company I'm at, but it's a paycheck, so I'm just going to show up and get that paycheck, but I don't really love what I do, or I've been laid off and trying to find something else. How do I do that, right? Like, these are not insignificant times. The stresses are not insignificant. And so I think to make sure that you are deliberate in making sure that you have a support system, or you have a therapist, or you have, Sina Mosayeb will often talk about having like your own personal board of directors. And I think these sort of things are, and I just realized I recently did a talk with Faye and with Sina around sort of resilience. I need to make that into an episode. But again, how do you have the people around you that can give you that honesty, that can prop you up, that can do these sort of things so that you can take care of yourself? Because here again, this concept that I keep coming back to of like a hope economy. Meaning, how do you keep yourself in a headspace to keep going, to feel inspired, to do great work, to not just tread water? Again, I think, the last year I was, for the first time in my life, I've seen a therapist because it just got to the place where I got so overwhelmed, I needed to. And again, I think these are the sort of things that we need to normalize this. That's fine. If you're in that place, you need to be able to do these sort of things, but how do you prioritize your mental health? And I think the last thing in this ecosystem around what it means for you is I do think, and this is probably coming from more of a leadership perspective than anything, but I do think people probably need to be more aware of how do you leave teams. Because in an era of defensive employment, in an era of an activated brand, of an activated network, your reputation and what people say about you is going to matter more than anything. This is a small industry. May not feel like it, right? But it is a small industry and people talk. I can't tell you how many times people reach out for unofficial references of saying, hey, this person used to be on your team. What'd you think about them? Oh, they put me down as a reference? No, but I know you were the leader and I trust your opinion, so what did you think about them? And I think sometimes that's a great place to be in, to say, look, I think they're fantastic. I love them. Sometimes it's a tough place to be in because sometimes I'd rather not be honest. But for the person who's asking, if the roles were reversed, I would want me to be honest. And again, I think you're going to see us in a couple places, right? I think, one, we've already seen companies start to wise up a little bit, that they're already using social media to check up on you and more of those things. Whenever you're applying for a role, they're going to start to ask around. And I think that the moment that often probably maybe matters the most in your employment tenure is when you leave. Sylvia Bafor will often talk about how people leave an emotional aftertaste. I think, again, if you haven't listened to her episode where she talks about that on this show, go back to the Share the Mic Now episode that she did, because she will talk about how, like, what is your emotional aftertaste? And I really think that whenever you leave a job, that often dictates what that lasting memory is. Because for me, and like I said, this is from a leader's perspective, there are probably no more telling moments or no more moments that will undo all of the things, all of the experiences I had before with somebody than watching the way they act, either when they quit or whenever they basically sense that I can no longer do anything for them. Because I think you get a real good understanding of what people are like in that moment. How much are they going to just throw you, throw their team, throw anybody under the bus because something better came along, or they don't work here anymore? Like, are they going to put in the 2 weeks? Are they going to think about the people that are on their team? Are they going to think about their peers? Or are they just out for themselves and they're going to go cut their better deal and do whatever it is they need to do? And if they need to throw you under the bus, if they need to throw their team under the bus, if they need to throw their peers under the bus, whatever it is, or again, are they going to work that 2 weeks, or just like, hey, I put in my notice and I am out of here? I've long said, right, I usually care very, very little for the way people are on good days. I'm extremely interested in what they are like on bad days, and I'm extremely interested in these moments where I think you can get a real sense of who someone is. And these moments, the way that you leave a team, the way that you change teams, the way that you do whatever that is, I really think are a clear look at, whenever it hits the fan, who am I dealing with? And I think we all need to think about that and leave as a professional, to be able to think about other people, right? Because I think that's the problem. At some point, we're all going to stumble. At some point, we're all going to fall. And if you've treated people well, if you treated them with respect, if you tried to reach out, if you tried to be empathetic, whenever that happens, people will rush in to help you. If in those moments instead you have thought you wanted to think about yourself, you want to just focus on that, then as you fall, it's sort of like a Wile E. Coyote cartoon or something where everybody suddenly clears out of the way and you cut a silhouette falling through the floor. So it matters. And again, I think these are the things you need to think about for you. Now, what do you do if you're a leader? What do you do if you're leading a team through this era? And I think there's a couple things here we need to be able to think about. I think one of the biggest things is to recognize that as a leader, that in many cases, you're going to have to create your own mini culture, your own microculture, your own safe space. Because I think for a lot of leaders, we're recognizing where we cannot depend on our company to create a culture or a purpose or a level of transparency or a level of honesty that is going to keep your team together. I think in many times if you've been a leader and you've had to go through a layoff, or you're going through a reorg, or you're going through bad news, in many cases, you're asked to give a company line that may not necessarily be the truth. It may not necessarily be empathetic. It may not necessarily be human, but it is a line of thinking that often makes things easier for the company. And I think those moments happen more and more all the time now. And I think that it means that you have to create more of a sense of identity for your team. You have to create more of a safe space for your team. You have to be the center of the hurricane. And I think this is the way I've always thought about it a little bit. Because if you ever actually look at what a hurricane is, right? These are big, they're destructive, they're powerful, sort of like what companies can be. But the eye of the hurricane, right? The part that is surrounded by so much power and damage and chaos, the eye of a hurricane usually is actually incredibly calm. Sometimes it's even sunny in there. that if you take one step in any direction, it's like flying cows and carnage. But how do we create that, right? How do you create that eye of the hurricane? How do you create that space to bring your team together, to give them purpose, to give them direction, to know that you're going to have to be able to do that? Now, again, not all companies are bad. Not all cultures are bad. Are there some that are out there? Yes. Are they too few and far between? Yes. But as a leader, I think more of the burden is going to fall on us to be the ones to create that space inside of our companies. And I think we also have to understand that in this era of defensive employment, tenures are going to be shorter. Attrition is going to be higher. That doing this sort of like generational planning of looking at where do I want my team to be in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years isn't necessarily going to be realistic, because people are going to come, they're going to go, your turnover is going to be much higher. That planning is going to be so much harder. And the best approach that I've ever heard about this, so I think, again, if you've listened to the show for any amount of time, you'll know I seek out chefs, right? Because I really think there's an interesting parallel between cooking and design. And so I'll ask them, because for a lot of the times for me, it's fascinating. Like, right? Like, how do you take a kid coming out of culinary school and put them in one of the best kitchens in the world and have them succeed, right? Like, I want to understand that process. And I think the best explanation that I've ever heard about how do you keep a team successful through attrition and through turnover came from Thomas Keller, right? Probably one of the most recognized chefs in the United States. His Per Se in New York and the French Laundry in Yountville, Sonoma, north of San Francisco. Whenever I asked him, I said, how do you think about this? And he said, look, I think about this like I'm running a sports franchise, right? People are going to come and they're going to go. And, look, maybe I've got the star quarterback right now. Maybe I've got that person that while I'm here, I can win a bunch of games. We can do some great things. But in a couple years, maybe they want more money. Maybe they get hurt, right? Like maybe something happens where they go away, they go to another team, they do something, and then what do I do? How do I keep staying as a winning team? And it really then looks at how are you developing talent? It really means that, again, you have to start paying attention to how are you developing that talent? What does your farm system look like? But I think also, and I think this is a blind spot that I've definitely had, whenever that star quarterback leaves, you also make sure you really pay attention to the people who also stayed, right? All the other people that are on the field. And that I think that because of this continues to be the case, and I think this has been a growing trend. I talked about this back when I was at Envision and doing the talent reports, that for a lot of this, I think that for us, as leaders, outreach has been and remains the new recruiting. Because, look, people are applying for jobs all the time, right? We discussed back that in episode 120. It doesn't work. If I'm on the inside of that process, I have to recognize that my recruiting process probably is screening out the talent I'm desperately looking for. So that means that I need to, while the candidates probably need to short circuit the system to get in, I probably maybe need to short circuit the system to find that talent. And this means that I need to take a more hands-on approach to find those sort of people. I need to reach out to talent when I see it. I need to communicate that they can also reach out to me, that whenever they do that, that I'm looking for this talent. I'm looking for the next great designer, whether that's through mentoring, whether it's through teaching, whether it's through like whatever that is. How do I create more of an outreach system to find that talent? Because you know what? Look, this 75% of people that get screened out by the 98% of companies that use software screening, algorithms are probably screening out some great talent. So how do I find that person? How do I bring them in? How do I reach out past that and to create a different paradigm, create a different conversation to be able to find them? But I think that's going to be a bit of the hard part, right? I think both for the individual contributor, the designer, the creative, as well as the leader, is that there is going to be more of a burden put on you in this process. Whether it's maintaining more of a network, whether it's paying more attention to what your company is doing, whether doing more due diligence in the way you join a team, to be more thoughtful around the way you leave that team. To do those sort of things is going to be a bigger burden on you. Again, as a leader, to be able to say, look, I need to take more of the time to create that space. I need to think more generationally and find like I'm running that sports franchise. I need to know that outreach is the new recruiting. These are more individualized concepts, either for the individual person or the individual leader. Because again, I think that the training, the support systems, the things we need, that scaffolding just isn't there the way that we need it to, or it's not giving us what we need in those moments. But I think figuring out what are those things for you. What are your goals? Where do you want to go? Understand that you are going to be more on your own in this process. And I think this is especially hard for those people who are newer in their career or those who are just trying to enter the industry, where I know you feel like it's just sort of like, well, I need to appeal to everybody. I'm not sure what makes me unique or different. I'm not sure what is my impact. So I'll leave you with this exercise that I've given to a bunch of my coaching clients that I think that helps. Because I think if you want to start to figure out what your impact is, if you want to figure out how do I give myself credit, right? How do I say who I am or what makes me different in a believable way? Because I know whenever I talk about that, it sort of feels like bullshit. One of the exercises I've done myself and I've given to others that is really helpful is to go out to coworkers you trust, current or former. Go out to family, go out to friends, go out to your significant others, and ask them to describe you in 3 individual words. Not 3 words as in a sentence, but 3 individual words. Around what do they think makes you special? What do they think means, what are the ways that you have an impact? What are the things that you do, right? And just those 3 words. Not an explanation, just 3 words. And what you want to do is just like any good design exercise, take those 3 words and write them down. Put them on a mural, put them on sticky notes, put them on something, but start to map them out. And you're going to see that different ones start to group together. Trends start to emerge. And I think the thing that you're going to discover is that in some places, this is going to reinforce what you think you are good at, what you are differentiated at. But maybe you've had a hard time owning it or giving it a voice. I think the other thing you're going to see is that maybe there are areas that are emerging out of that where maybe you don't give yourself enough credit. And that you need to think about that maybe that's something that you are good at that you didn't realize. Maybe that's a talent you have that feels kind of ordinary, but maybe to everybody else, it's extraordinary. But I think doing those sort of things of, again, getting clear on what makes you different, what is in your brand. Again, there's a multitude of episodes on the show where we talk about this. But I think that's going to be the power. Because the trick to this is going to be, how do we take the era of defensive employment? Which whenever I hear defense, right, that tends to mean I'm on the back foot. It means I'm constantly reacting. It's not a place I want to be, right? I don't want to be defensive all the time. I want to have fun. I want to have hope. I want to know where I'm going. I want to have a plan, right? If I think instead of it looking at defensive employment, how do we turn it into an era of offensive employment where we know what we want. We know what we want out of our jobs. We know what we want out of ourselves. We know our value and what we bring to the table. That's sort of been the core theme of this entire show over the last 6.5 years, has been to get to this place of understanding and owning these things so that you have a measure of control in processes and times and in companies where sometimes that maybe feels like control is the last thing you have. Because control, that level of control does some amazing things. I think it gives you purpose. It gives you direction. It gives you inspiration. And I think more importantly, it gives you hope. Because you know what it is you want, and that you can then set about to go do those things, to go find it. Being on the defense, being reactionary, being those sort of things, those are draining. Those are difficult. Those are hard moments. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be there, but I think the more that you're able to think about how do you put yourself in a good position? How do you stand up for your value? How do you watch what's going on? How do you, again, take advantage of that to be able to jump before things go badly, to be able to keep yourself in a good position? There's a lot of opportunity in that. And I think more importantly, for all of this, I think thinking about these things, there's probably a lot of self-acceptance in that. Of accepting what are you good at? What are the things that make you different? What is your value? What do you want to do? Because I think sometimes we almost feel that we should be grateful to have gotten this job. It's why we don't negotiate our salaries and other things, that we should just be grateful that the company gave us a job. I think the shift is coming because I think that people are voting with their feet and saying for a lot of these companies, you should be grateful that I'm here. And you should be grateful that the talent and what I bring is being contributed to this company. It's something to think about. Like I said, I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion. I'm sure this won't be the last episode I do about it, but think about those things, right? Like start to look at your career, start to prep some of this stuff, because I want to make sure we all stay in a good, empowered place with what it is we're doing. As always, I write all this stuff up, all the show notes, all the links, all the stuff I talk about, and put that in the show notes, so you can go check that out. As always, I think everybody in legal wants me to remind you, the views here are just my own. They don't represent any of my current clients or former employers. That also, I say it every time because I mean it every time, but thank you for your time, right? I know these aren't easy topics. These aren't easy things to reflect on. So I'm always incredibly humbled you want to spend any of that incredibly precious time listening to me. But go out and think about these things, right? Go out and figure out, how do you turn that defense into offense? How do you start to take advantage of the moment we're in? Because historically, these are the moments of the best creativity. The best ideas come out of moments like this, and I want to see you take advantage of that. And as always, while you do it, stay crazy.